Welcome to Washington in Focus, your source for the week's top stories in the state of Washington. I'm Cole Lauterbach, managing editor for the Center Square Newswire service. This week, we'll be discussing King County Regional Homeless Authorities making its case amid record homelessness. Spokane's major pumping the brakes on a proposed property tax hike. State officials worried about a flood of people opting out of the state's long-term care mandate, and a new threat of planned outages across the state. That's ahead on Washington in Focus. I'm Cole Lauterbach.
Knowledge is power, and you deserve to know what happens in your state government. That's why the nonprofit Franklin News Foundation is bringing you straight news journalism through the Center Square, reporting on state authorities and publishing stories that show where your money goes and who spends it. By supporting the Center Square, you can track politicians' use of taxpayer money and demand transparency from elected officials. This is how we can equip everyday Americans to hold their government accountable. Become a supporter of Franklin today at franklinnews.org/donate.
Welcome back to Washington in Focus. I'm Cole Lauterbach. Now, let's jump into the headlines. Homelessness in King County has reached crisis levels in recent years. The state estimates more than 50,000 people in the county being homeless at least once in 2023. Much of the government's response to that comes from the county's Regional Homelessness Authority, as some leaders have begun to question how well the organization is doing and whether they should continue to get their tax dollars. Seattle reporter Spencer Pauly had this story. First off, this is not a purely governmental entity, right, Spencer?
You're asking me the tricky question right off the bat, huh?
Absolutely.
It definitely is not just a pure governmental entity. To start, KCRHA was formed by a partnership between King County and Seattle, but that does not mean it has to be run the same way traditional government entities are. The best way I've heard it being described is as a quasi-governmental agency run in an independent manner. This means they have like 3 different committees, none of which are elected officials. And this has led to some issues with transparency and accountability.
In terms of what they are doing is they're getting a considerable amount of funding from the cities, the federal government, the county to handle all of the county's homelessness problem, right?
That's correct. Yeah. They have a lot of money they used and they distribute it to these nonprofit organizations that do the actual work to address homelessness, bringing people into shelter, providing what they call permanent supportive housing, and all the services that, are relevant to that type of cause. For the agency's 2024 budget, that totaled $249.1 million, with a lot of the majority of funding stemming from Seattle, the federal HUD department, and King County. Now, this year alone, information I've dug and recovered from the agency, KCRHA is spending $167.8 million towards 60 organizations to do this dirty work. That's a lot of money.
A ton of money. And meanwhile, the scrutiny comes as homelessness is not getting better. It was the Department of Commerce, the state level, correct, that had an eye-popping number of people in the county alone that at one point were homeless.
Yeah, that's the number that KCRHA goes off of. This 53,500 people who have at one point experienced homelessness in King County. That is the number they go off of. And from there on, you're seeing not much change, honestly. And honestly, you can see an increase in some capacity, but it's hard to kind of calculate. Homelessness is still a huge number. And from just being out here, you don't see that going down.
Now, when you spoke to a senior staffer at KCRHA, what was the reasoning for the predicament that the county's in, despite these hundreds of millions of dollars are not only already spent, but also allocated for future?
Well, I suppose the argument being made by KCRHA is that it's just a long process, and there's a lot of eyes around the country watching how, the agency implements a strategy. They are spending more on organizations with strategies that the agency is discovering work more effectively, but at the same time, it's just not happening fast enough. Jeffrey Sims also said that KCRHA operates in an environment that does not have enough services for the scale of homelessness. With 53,000 people, you have to get 53,000 beds or so, which seems like this region does not have. So that's just kind of the answer I'm getting a lot of from here. During my discussions, they're also saying inflation costs are making it difficult. And that's where you're seeing spending just balloon up more and more, it seems.
Now, the funding, as you mentioned, largely comes from the city of Seattle, among other sources. But of the cities that do contract and send their money to KCRHA to handle homelessness, Seattle's obviously the big fish. And the city at this point is now in the process of reevaluating its participation with the authority. And this all came from something you witnessed. You saw a protest of homeless people outside of City Hall that seemed to be really eye-opening for city council members.
Yeah, they out of the $249.1 million, Seattle funds $104.7 million. That's about 42%, somewhere in that field.
Yeah, just less than half.
Exactly. And we're seeing issues with, migrants coming in where they're staying homeless, and Seattle's says, where's KCRHA to do this work? And they're having to do this when they funded this agency to take care of this issue. Seattle already informed KCRHA it's pulling $11.7 million as it looks at the future relationship with the agency. There is a pending contract coming 2025. And last month we saw the Seattle City Council, which, mind you, it's mostly new council members who are kind of unfamiliar with KCRHA. A lot during this KCRHA's presentation to the committee, council members are asking questions basically saying, what do you do? There's not much of an understanding, especially with these new city council members. So KCRHA basically had to explain, that they are an agency that distributes money to nonprofits to do the work. And that just wasn't good enough. A lot of council members are saying, your structure, your formation is clunky. What are these three committees? Where is the accountability? And that all needs to be addressed. And they better do it fast before this contract comes up.
Yeah, this summer you're expecting to probably see some movement on that, right? What's, in terms of total context too, Spencer, what is the next step that the city of Seattle is looking at?
Well, they're going to have to keep looking and seeing the results that they're getting this year. This contract's set for next year. So we're going to see the point in time count, which is, this is like the best way.
It's a snapshot, essentially, of all the homelessness in the city.
Exactly. And, we'll see if it decreases. But, KCRHA, like I said, would argue that it takes some time and it's a process and we're figuring things out. But Seattle, by the time that comes up, they're going to see maybe we're going to find a different way that makes it faster.
Spencer, this group is not easy to pin down. They've got kind of a reputation for not really offering much in terms of conversation. Describe the process that you had to go through to get an interview.
I think I've told some people that I felt like I was Michael Moore and Roger and me trying to hunt down the GM CEO because many emails, many phone calls left unanswered. Eventually, I went all the way downtown Seattle to their actual building. And none of the doors were open. I assumed that they would have a front desk, but I guess that was wrong of me. So I started pulling on all these locked doors until a security guard came out and said, what are you doing?
Man.
Eventually, I think just because of that, they were like, okay, maybe we should just get this guy off of our back. So we got that interview scheduled, and, I'm grateful.
Right.
That finally happened.
Well, great job. Good reporting on this, and we'll track it as we move along. We learned this week that Spokane Mayor Lisa Brown is hitting the brakes on her proposed public safety tax levy that was meant to not only enhance police and fire services, but also plug a significant budget hole. Thanks to investigative reporter TJ Martinell for covering the breaking story, but Eastern Washington reporter Tim Klauser is here to give the backstory on what has been referred to as a monstrous property tax proposal. Tim, what's the reasoning behind Mayor Brown pocketing the ballot measure?
Well, like you said, Cole, Spokane has a significant budget deficit to fill, around $50 million to be frank. That deficit's a combination of depleted reserves, which have sunk from $28.3 million to now $7.6 million, and the general fund expenses, which have exceeded revenue for the past 3 years. But the departments and programs that Brown talks about funding with these enhancements are actually funded by that general fund, meaning that since the levy revenue would go towards filling that hole in the general fund, the city could move it around as needed.
That money's fungible. Now, this proposal, one of the city council members referred to it as monstrous. Just how large of a levy are we talking about here? Because this isn't dead. It's just they're waiting on it. I guess she's just trying to pull it back and get some more favorability for it. This is a big tax levy, correct?
Yeah, the levy as proposed was a property tax of $1 for every $1,000 of assessed property value. For the medium homeowner, it would have added around $330 of additional taxes each year, adding up to an annual revenue of around $40 million a year for the city. But the levy didn't have an evaluation period written in or much written in at all. So technically, it would go on forever. It's not like other levies where they might revisit it in 5 years and talk about criteria it would follow moving forward. And that's where it was really hung up with a few council members. They wanted to see that evaluation point written in, or any details written in general.
The proposal was initially billed as improving public safety in the city. Police, fire, what was referred to as enhancements in marketing speak. But the majority of the levy's funds wouldn't have been spent on anything new if it were to have made its way to the ballot this fall. Explain where much of it would have gone.
Yeah, like I said before, most of the levy would have gone towards maintaining current levels of service, since the departments that were anticipating those enhancements are funded by the general fund. It would continue funding them as is. Before, Brown said that if this public safety levy didn't pass, around 200 people could lose their jobs. And a council memo that was sent out has slimmed that number a little bit. Now they're saying that it would have resulted in 50 police officers losing their job, 30 firefighters, and around 70 other employees. And that's one of the aspects still up in the air now that the levy is being pushed past the August ballot. Will the people with those jobs be let go or not? But aside from maintaining that current level of funding, the levy would have replaced some of the police and fire departments' vehicles, increased foot and bike patrols throughout the city, funded the upcoming fire academy that they had planned on canceling, and supported behavioral health teams, among other things.
Well, none of it's being, from our understanding at this point, it's being held from the August ballot. Will the city have to face a budget in which they have to control spending, or is there another chance to get it passed between now and then where this money would be able to be accounted for if they pass their next budget?
Yeah, well, it looks like they're going to have to control their spending for the meantime. There is another chance to pass this levy, but that's not going to be until November if it's not going to be on the ballot in August. November would be the next special election. And City Council already voted to move another levy to the February ballot, leaving that November spot still open for a tax initiative like this. But my guess would be that this levy will be on the ballot this coming November.
You think it's coming in November, huh? Oh, wow.
Yeah.
All right. Well, excellent. We will keep track of that. Good story. Thank you, TJ and Tim, for the coverage of this important issue out in Spokane. Moving along, Washington's long-term care program has been in effect since last July. This is now a citizen-led initiative on the ballot this November, could let people opt out of having that fee taken from their paychecks at any time. With the very real possibility of the initiative prevailing, state officials are now concerned that there's going to be a rush to get out of the program and save that money. Capitol correspondent Carlene Johnson joins us. Carlene, the tone of that meeting that you covered seemed like state officials are kind of expecting this initiative to pass. Was I reading that right? From seeing your story and a couple of the clips from the meeting?
Yeah, I did get that impression for sure. Employment security staff members, they're the ones charged with coming up with how the benefits are going to be paid out once that happens, and kind of gearing up for that. You've also got DSHS over them. The state actuary took part in the meeting, and then there's several state lawmakers that are part of this long-term services and supports trust commission, which was formed, basically after the WA Cares Long-Term Care Act program took effect. So they spent a lot of time in the meeting, the May 1st meeting, talking about contingency plans if Initiative 2124, which, as you said, would allow the opt-out, if that passes and that flood of opt-out calls start coming in. It certainly seemed, the whole tone of that meeting, that that's their expectation.
And to be fair, it could just be like a preparing for the worst because, they have no idea if it's going to pass or not, just as much as we do or don't. And they're just saying, well, if it does, there could be a big issue that we want to try and be responsible for in terms of stewarding all these opt-outs. Now, you had mentioned in your story, this is not nothing for a family that is living in expensive housing and dealing with high prices of gas. Washington has some of the highest gas prices in the country, and groceries are still dealing with long-term inflationary effects. So, Carlene, just how much is being taken out of most W-2 workers' checks right now if they did not successfully opt out of the program before it started last July?
Right. And that window, closed even before the deadline, really, because as we've discussed before, insurance companies stopped offering private plans for sale here in Washington state. So a lot of people that even wanted to opt out couldn't That said, those of us that have paid into this from, as you said, July of last year, it's 58 cents for every $100 we make. So say, for example, somebody makes $75,000 a year. They take about $36. Your employer takes about $36 a month out of your paycheck, or $18 if you're paid, twice a month, as many people are. So a lot of us don't pay attention to it. We don't pull up our pay stubs, right? It's just an auto deposit, I should say, into our account. We go, boom, it's there on the 30th. I'm so happy. And we don't even look at all the many deductions, but this is yet one more. And that adds up. For that example I just gave of somebody that makes $75,000 a year, that $36 a month out of your paycheck, by the time you would have your first opportunity to opt out of the program, assuming it passes, in November, would be, opting out January 1, 2025. So you will have paid more than $650 into the program at that point if you make $75,000.
Now, would I get that money back if I opted out, or does the state just say, well, sorry, thanks?
We finally were able to get an answer to that from this meeting. I had pressed Employment Security for a response on this after their meeting from the previous month in April, and could not get a direct answer, but it was asked in this meeting on the 1st, and very clearly said, nope, you're not getting a dime of that back. It is a forward-facing program, as the commissioner from ESD, Cami Feek, said, and I quoted in my story this week, meaning you're going to pay, even if the measure passes in November, you're going to pay into that program through the end of the year, because it's a quarterly deduction that your employer then sends that chunk at the end of the year. And nope, she says you're not getting it back. It's forward facing, so state will keep that money. So you can kiss that money goodbye, I guess, at this point, even if you never have any intention of getting back into WACARES at some point.
And as you say that too, it makes me wonder, once the people do opt out, I imagine that there's going to have to be a process not only of interacting with the state, but you're also going to have to reach out to your HR department and say, listen, I opted out of this. Stop withdrawing it from my paycheck. Yeah. Because I'm sure the state of Washington's not going to do you the courtesy of reaching out to your employer and making sure to understand that they're no longer asking for that money.
Right. And they're coming up with this whole new subgroup. They're not sure whether that's going to be a subcommission off of the one they've already got, or just a separate committee that handles it. And Employment Security has gone to the Office of Financial Management and said, we need to ramp up big time in anticipation of this influx of opt-outs. So whether that's, new hires, a new website, a call center, because remember, the state's been working with the employers, not individual employees, who are now going to be calling going, get me the heck out of this thing. They don't even know what they're going to be up against at this point.
Carlene, one interesting nugget that you captured in your story was who exactly the state officials expect to get out of the program as soon as they're able to, should this initiative pass.
Yeah, and that speaks to the solvency of it, because the state actuary was part of the meeting, and Matt Smith, he said, he was asked directly, is it valuable to pursue some alternatives here? It's going to be a huge mountain to climb. And how will this thing stay solvent? He really hedged on that answer, but did say his expectation would be, if the measure passes, the opt-outs are not going to be the person who makes a little bit of money, but maybe has some serious long-term care health concerns, right? It's going to be the person who can afford their own plan, private plan, should they want it, and probably makes a higher income. You get those higher income earners opting out, the program very quickly becomes insolvent. And he was not unclear about that response.
Yeah, that was a fascinating potential look into the future. Good story, Carlene. Thank you. We'll continue to track this as it moves forward. There are several factors that make for the ideal conditions for a wildfire. The state's utilities are now letting residents know that one of any of those conditions in their areas could force them to take the preventative step of shutting down the grid. Investigative reporter TJ Martinell has been monitoring these measures. TJ, what are some of the conditions that could lead to neighborhoods around the state going dark?
Well, if there's low humidity, if there's really high temperatures, or there's strong winds, and this is all factors that could cause some sort of natural element to impact the electrical infrastructure. So, for example, if during a strong windstorm, if there was a tree that came down on one of the power lines, there was a spark, and the spark caused a fire because there's low humidity. That's something that they're trying to avoid.
And now this is a statewide thing where they're making these announcements. PSE, Vista, what at this point, what are they saying? Why are they doing this now?
Well, what's going on is utilities are at risk of liability if there's a wildfire that started due to damage to their infrastructure. There was the Camp Hope fire in California in 2018 that caused, I think, $16 billion worth of damage. Dozens and dozens of people were killed. And that was due to a utility power lines. And so they were held liable for that. And that's actually been a problem here in Washington State as far as risk and liability. A lot of public utility districts have had trouble getting liability insurance or at the coverage that they're used to because the insurance companies don't want to insure them because of the massive risk of being sued or having to pay out to private citizens.
Well, and plus replacing a house that's insured in a place like Washington is really expensive. That's another issue that, like you mentioned, the campfire in California, these companies stopped covering them, not only because of the risk of fires and flooding or whatever have you, but the fact that it's such an outsized cost to make that contract whole that there's no way they would make money on it. And on a macro level and a large level, they're just not going to cover these homes because they don't want to have to take that loss, assuming that there's going to be X number of homes that burn down annually. But TJ, with some of these conditions, like low humidity, dry vegetation, those aren't just some low humidity this weekend. You have low humidity or dry vegetation that could last for weeks. They're saying those residents could be without power that whole time.
I think the important thing to keep in mind is the program is called a public safety power shutoff, and it's considered a measure of last resort. So this is effectively where they legitimately believe that a wildfire will start if they don't turn the power off. And this is not in the obviously not in the entire coverage area. This is in areas where there's a high risk of wildfires. And Puget Sound Energy specifically, they actually have customers in the Kittitas County in central Washington. So between the town of Roslyn and all the way to Ellensburg and up through State Route 97, which goes through the national forest land, those are the high risk areas. Other areas are probably not going to see this ever happen because the chronic long-term risk is just not high enough. As particularly in Western Washington where it gets more precipitation, but in areas where you can go without rain for a very long time and areas that have already seen wildfires, this is where this is a possibility. But again, it's a measure of last resort. So this is something that is a worst case scenario.
Another story you've been tracking that caught my attention is the state's effort to make EV charging stations available across the state, especially in these rural stretches. Would those EV charging stations be affected by these shutdowns?
Yes, if they're connected to the grid, and the same thing with solar panels, you would not be able to charge your vehicle in that area if it's connected to a grid that's getting power from the utility that does the shutdown. And I reached out to Puget Sound Energy about that. And again, this is why they give such an advance notice, and they're letting you know so that people can take the precautions or just prepare for the fact that the power is going to go out.
Understood. All right, great. Good story, TJ. Thank you. And a big thank you to our journalists for sharing their stories. Stay up to date with these and more at thecentersquare.com. I'm Cole Lauterbach, and until next time, this has been Washington in Focus.